is the 21st. January 21st, and we are finally doing volume. We kind of picked this topic because of this week being shorter. So it's a little easier topic. Okay, so volume is the measure of space occupied by a solid region. Honestly, I think of the tissue box and kind of like how much tissue's inside. Okay. Now, there are two formulas for this. The first formula for the volume of a rectangular prism, that is the key. For this one, it would have to be a rectangular prism or a tissue box. It is volume equals, it has to be a capital V and an equal sign. Then it has to be what was called a cursive lowercase l, or you could call it a script L, for length times width times height. Length times width times height. Has to be that cursive L, obviously, because if it was a regular L, it would look like a 1. Okay? Now, the reason this works, and the reason we're going to kind of point back and forth here, length times width is kind of base times height. And I want you to think about it. This part right here. Meaning, if I highlight the bottom of this shape, we're kind of thinking this is the base. It is the area of a rectangle. I want you to think about that. Isn't length times width or base times height the area of a rectangle? Okay, so you would get, if you multiplied those, we would get the orange box. Then, if we multiply it times the height, is when it turns into this almost like 3D shape, like we're filling in all of it. For this formula, and this is kind of a weird hint, when you use this formula, you're going to want to see 3 numbers. And this formula to me is what I'm going to call the 6th grade formula. Meaning this is 5th grade, this is 6th grade. Because it only works with rectangular prisms. How do you get, I want you to go back to last week. How do you get the area of like a triangle? What do?
You multiply the base and height and divide it by 2.
Right. There's that divided by 2 step, right? So if you look at something, the front of this thing, the length times the width, or the base times the height, I mean, whatever you want to call this, is just the area of a rectangle. So let me show you some. There is a second formula that you kind of use more like in 7th grade, but they're wanting us to introduce you to it. All it is this formula is going to work with the volume, but of any prism. I want you to imagine, what if the ends of this shape were triangles? What if the ends of this shape were octagons or hexagons or pentagons? Then they could use a formula of V equals, and what they call it is big B, little h. It's kind of silly. They call it big B, little h. Meaning, what is the base of your shape?
What's the height?
And times the height. Now look, all it is, if you'll notice something, do you see how your length and your width are that box? Okay, down here, the length and the width are called the big B, the base of that shape. So when we see 2 numbers, just 2 numbers, then it's kind of like we can assume we need to use this formula. Because what it is they're going to give us our base already multiplied, And all we're going to have to do is just multiply that times the height. Next year, that base might be a triangle. So you might have to do base times height divided by 2. And then do times the height. Next year, that base could be a trapezoid. Think about that formula for a trapezoid. B1 plus B2 times the height divided by 2. Okay? So, we're going to, the best way I can explain this is, we're going to mainly use this one. And then tomorrow, you'll see some with more of this as an example. Okay? Now, there is an extra odd part of this, which is called shading the base. And as you kind of see, I shaded the base on these because I knew they were the base. They were the length and the width. This was big B. It's the base. When we go down to a shape like number 1, and I'm going to try to show you, if you will look, it will help. Some of these boxes or rectangles are very obvious to us. We can see one number, we can see the other number, and we know we would multiply them to get the area. Okay. Then some of them, there might be just a number like it looks like it's kind of flying out and around the corner. Okay. You're wanting to find one that you know for sure you're staring at one rectangle in this shape, and you know one wall and the other wall. So, if I look at this shape, number 1 here, I personally see the two numbers that make the most sense to Miss Donahue, which could be different for you, is I see this 2 and that 5. And I see, for me, Miss Donahue, that is going to be my base. It doesn't have to be. Your base might be 10 times 5, and you do the bottom. That's going to be the weird part. Our bases can all be different. Okay? Here is the other trick. Bases aren't always on the bottom. Bases are not always on the bottom. Listen, in this classroom, what if I told you I made that wall the base? You're inside a box. You're in a big rectangular prism. And I made that the base. Then where's the height? Up or down, right? Kind of weird to say the ceiling or the floor would be the height, but it could be. So what it is you got to claim a base. It's kind of like you're going to say, this is my base. Shade it in. And then when you fill in the formula is where it's got to be kind of right. So kind of watch. All it is yes, I'm going to use the formula with 3 numbers. But there is a trick to it. If you shade in the 5 and the 2 as your base, that means the 5 and the 2 need to be your first 2 numbers. They can be 2 and 5 or 5 and 2. It doesn't matter. Okay? But they got to be your first 2 numbers. And then the last number is kind of like that extra number hanging out, which is 10. So if you shade the 2 and the 5, then that should be your first 2 numbers. Now granted, it's all multiplying. We're all going to get the same answer. 2 times 5 is 10. 10 times 10 is 100. But they got to be kind of in a certain order. The first 2 have got to be what your base is colored in as. Okay, volume is always cubed or to the 3rd power. Tomorrow I'm going to try to create and bring in some little boxes to fit inside other boxes to show you. I know it sounds silly, but foot cubed. It's kind of like 2 feet times 5 feet times 10 feet. So that gives me 3 feet measurements. Okay. So look at number 2. You kind of got some choices, and if you'll watch my fingers, it might help you if you're not seeing this. Okay, one kid might do this. So what if I cover up all of that and you see just that rectangle? What two numbers is that rectangle? And 4, right. So that rectangle could be shaded in. You could say that's your base, and the first two numbers in your formula are 3.1 and 4. Well, what if you don't do those two numbers and you do these two numbers? 5.6 and 4. Someone else might think that's the base. You're both right. It just matters how you put it in order. So like if I shade this side, I know it is this 4 is what I'm meaning, and that 5.6. Shade it in, because you got to shade it in. Write your formula. Okay, whatever you did is your base and your height of your shaded in shape. Okay, here's the other thing. Miss Donahue, when I see a bunch of decimals, I use parentheses to show multiplication. Otherwise, it looks like a bunch of dots flying around. So you'll see me a lot of times do parentheses. Okay, you can do a dot. That doesn't matter, but that's just me. Okay, so is it 22.4? 5.6 times 4? Is that what you got? Okay. And then times 3.1. What'd you get? I'm cheating. Okay. Make sure I got this right. Listen, you got to finish it off. It's got more than one step. Volume equals. Blush, blush.
I'm getting used to this quiz.
I know. I've done it a few times today. Okay, number 3. What is most obvious to you guys as a rectangle or square? What two numbers?
1/3.
Yeah, to me it's this front box also. Like that to me is the base. You know, it doesn't have to be, but to me, I'm just saying like that's what I would use also. So when I write my formula, six and 3. Oops. One and 1/3 times 1 and 1/3 is 1 and 7/9. And then 1 and 7/9 times 6 and 3/4 is 12. It's kind of weird. It's just 12 yards cubed. 12 yards cubed. Okay.
How do you know which to do first?
It matters what you shade. So if you shade this box, you want to use these two as your first two numbers. And it doesn't matter which order, if they were like 2 and 3 or if you do 3 and 2, that doesn't matter.
If you shade the top, what is 6 and 2/4 and 1 and 1/3?
You got it. So if you were to shade the top, you would tell me it'd be that and that times that. Which is kind of weird. Those are the same anyway. Kind of weird.
But does it matter? Like, do you have to do 6 a 3-4 first, and then the 1 and
You could flip them. You could flip them if you've got that part shaded in. And this shading thing is something that, from what I understand, the 7th grade teachers will thank us for. Meaning, next year, right now we're finding a base, but it almost seems silly because it's only 3 numbers. It kind of works either way anyway. It just works. But next year, when they're triangles and all these other shapes, is when it's going to help you when they're going to make you find the base, kind of like this year. But those bases may not always be rectangles. Okay. This one, I am glad this one's on here because some of you honestly missed the few test questions that had trickers. This isn't to trick you, but they just put the same number multiple times. So it's kind of like you got to look at it and say, now which numbers do I not need? Okay?
Do you need the 4?
So what do you think a base is? Find your 2 numbers to you that make a rectangle. Yeah, you're going to need 3 numbers, and there's 5 there. So what 2 do you make a rectangle?
10 and 4.
10 and 4, so you're kind of looking at that. That's the one I did. You don't have to. You kind of could do this top box because that's 10 and 17. Okay? It's up to you. I've been doing 10 and 4 and saying that's a base.
You did A.
I've been waiting all day to do that. Finally. I've only done this, what is this, 5th period? 5 times today? Okay. Volume equals length times width times height. I also put in the video I made about this for the Disney kids. 7 times 8 was 35. Anyway, we make mistakes, I promise. I know 7 times 5 is 35. So, okay. Length times width. I'm going to use 4 times 10 or 10 times 4. Doesn't matter. Okay. What matters on this one is picking the height. What is my other number that's needed?
17.
17. It is, to me, obvious, but maybe not. There we go. So we have 40 times 17 is 680, yes. 680 meters cubed. So that was a good example of what if they put numbers all over the place and picking the numbers in the right order. Okay. The last one is a sentence, but I like it because they didn't use the words length, width, and height. They do say the word rectangular prism, but they say that it is measuring 10 meters and 7 meters along the base. Listen, you got to kind of know what that means. Along the base, meaning it must be the length and the width. And then the height is what? 12, because it's how tall it is. So you could do 10 times 7 or 7 times 10. And then the 12 should be the height. $840? Let's have that. I haven't done it in a couple hours. Yeah. Okay. We won't really have to draw any that I remember, that I know of, thank goodness. It's more just finding the sides. Sometimes there's sentences, stuff like that. Okay. Now on the back, this is the homework. Most classes have had some time to do it. Some of the classes have been kind of talkative, so maybe not. But so we're going to color our base and find the volume of each rectangular prism. Okay. So what numbers starting out, I know they look shaded, but they're not. It's just the way the copy machine makes it look. So on number 1, what do you feel is the base?
3 and 4.
Me too. I personally think it's 3 and 4. And I would say that that's my base. You don't have to. Just prove to me what you think it is. I did it again. Volume equals 4 times 3 or 3 times 4 times 7. 84 meters cubed. Okay, number 2. What do you kind of feel is the base on that one?
10 and 9.
Okay, so if you want to do 10 and 9, you're saying this wall and that wall. And that's fine. That's just the front of the box. Just shading it in. Someone else might have said 10 and 7. That's fine. Okay. Here we go. Length times width times height. Mm-hmm. Number 3, what do you feel like the base is?
2.
Me, I keep thinking it's 3 right here and 2. Yeah, that's what I've been using. Just make sure you're shading them in. Times 2.7. So I got a 6. $16.2. Yeah. Feet cubed. Okay. What time is it?
12:49.
Number 3, I got 16.2. Oh, that little blue basket. Yeah. We come anytime. We check homework in the mornings. Real quick, we are finishing these for homework. These, that one. Okay. No,
Go in the morning, you need to be in.
yeah, like